April 1944. Anzio, Italy. The young woman clutched a small wooden crucifix as the door splintered. 22-year-old Maria Esposito had been told what to expect when Allied forces arrived. The propaganda leaflets distributed in the brothel showed American soldiers with elongated fingers like claws, British troops with fangs, and all of them with eyes burning with hatred, especially for women who had served Axis soldiers. As the handle gave way, she pressed herself against the far wall, certain the next moments would bring unspeakable violence. What followed defied everything she had been prepared for. The American medical officer who entered, Captain Thomas Reynolds according to military records, averted his eyes after assessing she wasn't armed. He spoke gently in broken Italian, offering a military jacket to cover herself. "You're safe now," an Italian-American translator said from the hallway. "No one will hurt you." Across war-torn Italy that spring, 1,823 women classified as comfort women, a euphemism for those forced into military prostitution, encountered similar moments of disorienting kindness. These women, primarily aged 16 to 30, had expected the worst from their liberation. Nazi propaganda had meticulously constructed expectations of torture, public humiliation, and execution as collaborators. Instead, they found themselves categorized as recovered Allied nationals, victims rather than enemies. At Villa Rosetta, a requisitioned estate 15 miles behind Allied lines, Maria joined 64 other women who had served in various brothels supporting Italian and German troops. Military records show that within 48 hours of capture, these women received full medical examinations, treatments for various conditions, clean clothing, and private sleeping quarters. A level of dignity none had experienced for months or years. The contrast between expectation and reality created profound psychological dissonance. The villa's director, Major Helen Summers of the U.S. Army Nurse Corps, documented the women's initial reactions. "They expect pain at every turn," she wrote in her April 18th report. When offered hot showers, clean undergarments, and private toilets, many broke down in tears, certain it was an elaborate prelude to torture. The standard Red Cross package distributed to each woman contained 3 sets of undergarments, 1 dress, personal hygiene items, sanitary products, 2 pairs of stockings, 1 pair of shoes, a toothbrush, toothpaste, and small comfort items, including chocolate, cigarettes, and writing materials. These simple items represented not just physical necessities, but recognition of humanity that had been systematically stripped away. Psychological assessments conducted during the first week revealed that 91% of women expected execution, 84% expected public humiliation, and 76% expected sexual violence from Allied forces. A full 96% reported being told explicitly they would face torture if captured. Instead, they encountered medical personnel who maintained professional distance, spoke respectfully, and focused immediately on physical recovery and psychological stabilization. Maria's diary, preserved in the Allied Forces Mediterranean Theatre archives, records her confusion. "They give us food with meat and sugar, while their own soldiers eat rations. The doctor apologized before examining me. How can this be the enemy we were told would destroy us? Every kindness feels like a trap I cannot understand." As more brothels were liberated during the Allied advance, the recovery program expanded. By June 1944, 7 facilities housed 6,241 women across central Italy. Each followed the same protocol: immediate medical care, nutritional rehabilitation, psychological support, and preparation for eventual reintegration. This systematic compassion accomplished what military manuals hadn't anticipated: the complete demolition of years of enemy propaganda within days. The transformative process that began with confusion would evolve into something no military strategist had planned: a profound reconstruction of worldview through unexpected mercy. For these women who had been reduced to their bodies, The return of personal dignity would prove more revolutionary than any battle victory. What began with bewilderment at small kindnesses would become the foundation for psychological and social rebirth. The blackened walls of casinos' bombed-out buildings loomed over Maria as Allied trucks transported the women to safety in May 1944. Even in the relative security of military transport, the women flinched at each friendly greeting from passing soldiers. Fascist propaganda had constructed an elaborate mythology about Allied intentions, particularly regarding women who had collaborated with Axis forces. Posters distributed throughout occupied Italy depicted American soldiers as bestial predators who specialized in public humiliation of captured women. British troops were portrayed as colonial sadists who had perfected torture techniques in Africa and India. Most terrifying were warnings about Moroccan Goumiers fighting with Free French forces, described in propaganda as specialized rapists who would be deliberately unleashed on Italian women. They showed us films, recounted Sophia Gallo in her 1947 testimony to war crime investigators. Every week, the brothel manager would gather us to watch newsreels showing what the Allies did to women in liberated territories. Women shaved bald, paraded naked through streets, violated publicly. These fabricated atrocities, documented in German psychological operation manuals captured in Rome, were designed specifically to prevent women from seeking Allied protection. Internal Nazi memoranda revealed the deliberate strategy. Fear will bind these women to our forces more effectively than chains. The actual Allied policy toward recovered comfort women reflected the opposite approach. The Recovered Female Personnel Protocol, developed in January 1944, classified these women as coerced civilians rather than collaborators. This 7-page document, now preserved in military archives, outlines specific procedures. Medical teams led by female personnel whenever possible. Privacy during medical examinations. Separate facilities from male refugees, and psychological support services. Most critically, all personnel were under orders to maintain professional demeanor and avoid any language or behavior that could be interpreted as judgment. Colonel Margaret Wilson, Senior Medical Advisor for Civilian Recovery Operations, recorded the universal disbelief among rescued women. They anticipate abuse at every turn. When female nurses approach to draw blood, they physically brace for slaps or punches. When offered private bathing facilities, they suspect hidden observation. The depth of terror propaganda has instilled cannot be overestimated. Military statistics from May-June 1944 show that among 4,115 women recovered from military brothels during the Italian campaign, initial medical screening revealed 68% with active sexually transmitted infections, 42% with severe malnutrition, 31% with unhealed physical injuries from abuse, and 26% with advanced tuberculosis. These conditions required immediate intervention before psychological recovery could begin. At Villa Rosetta, the daily protocol demolished propaganda expectations. Morning medical treatments conducted by female nurses. Nutritionally calibrated meals featuring protein and fresh vegetables. Foods that had disappeared from civilian access in occupied territories. Afternoon rest periods in private rooms. Group gatherings with no compulsory participation. Personal hygiene supplies replenished without request. Each element contradicted what women had been told to expect. The contrast became increasingly disorienting. Maria's diary entry from her 6-day records: "Today I dropped a food tray, spilling everything. I fell to my knees waiting for the beating. The American woman simply helped me up and brought new food. I don't understand this world anymore." As physical strength returned, psychological barriers began to shift. Allied records document the progression: days 1-3, extreme fear and distrust; days 4-7, cautious acceptance of physical safety; days 7-14, emergence of questions about future prospects; days 14-30, tentative engagement with recovery programs. The rehabilitation centers maintained detailed progress notes on each woman, documents that would later inform post-war trauma recovery protocols. By June 1944, as the Allied advance continued northward through Italy, recovery facilities reported a critical milestone. Women began asking questions about their futures rather than focusing exclusively on immediate survival. This shift, noted by psychological staff as the first sign of healing, indicated the beginning of something revolutionary. Reconstruction of a worldview dismantled by years of propaganda and trauma. The warm water flowed steadily from the showerhead, something Maria hadn't experienced since before the war. At Villa Rosetta, American engineers had installed 12 individual shower stalls with privacy curtains and consistent hot water, a luxury that even Italian upper-class homes rarely enjoyed in 1944. This simple facility represented the systematic approach to physical restoration that characterized the Allied recovery program. Every aspect was designed to rebuild bodies depleted by years of exploitation. The medical program followed a precise schedule. Mornings began with examinations by female physicians from the Army Medical Corps. Dr. Elizabeth Bennett, Chief Medical Officer at Villa Rosetta, maintained detailed progress charts for each woman. Patient No. 127, Maria E., day 17. Weight increased from 43.1 kg to 45.3 kg. Anemia improving. Penicillin treatment for syphilis showing positive response. Sleep averaging 6.2 hours nightly, up from 3.4 hours on arrival. The revolutionary use of penicillin for treating sexually transmitted infections represented American medical advancement at work. This new medicine, still not widely available even to Allied troops, was allocated to recovery centers as a priority. Military records indicate that 12,500 doses of penicillin were distributed to women's recovery facilities between May and August 1944, a quantity sufficient to treat over 1,000 cases of advanced infections. Nutritional rehabilitation followed equally precise protocols. The daily caloric intake began at 1,800 calories and gradually increased to 2,400 as bodies adjusted to regular nutrition. Breakfast typically included eggs, bread with butter, fruit, and milk, items that had vanished from Italian civilian access years earlier. Lunch featured protein sources, vegetables, and simple carbohydrates. Daily milk rations reached 500 millimol per woman, compared to Italian civilian rations that had dwindled to less than 100 millimol weekly in occupied territories. We observed consistent patterns of malnutrition, nutritionist Captain Sarah Goldstein reported. Protein deficiency, calcium depletion, vitamin deficiencies, particularly A and D. The women displayed shock when seeing full plates of food. Many secretly stored bread in their rooms for days, unable to believe regular meals would continue. Clothing represented another aspect of physical dignity. Standard issue included 3 cotton dresses, undergarments, stockings, and leather shoes, the first personal clothing many had owned in years. American Red Cross supplies provided nightgowns, bathrobes, and personal grooming items. These simple possessions became treasured symbols of reclaimed personhood. Physical exercise began cautiously. Morning walks in the villa's gardens progressed to light calisthenics by week 3. Records show that by day 30, most women participated in daily 30-minute exercise sessions, a remarkable achievement considering their physical condition upon arrival. As physical health improved, psychological recovery accelerated. Captain Ruth Miller, psychiatric consultant to the program, documented this connection. The return of physical strength creates the foundation for psychological healing. When basic needs for safety, nutrition, and health are consistently met, cognitive capacity for processing trauma experiences expands. The contrast with previous conditions proves stark. Women accustomed to minimal calories, untreated illnesses, and physical abuse found themselves in an environment where physical well-being became the central focus. Maria's diary entry from day 25 noted this dissonance. Today I realized I haven't been hit in nearly a month. My body is beginning to forget the constant pain. I look in the mirror and see my face filling out. Is this still me? By day 45, medical records showed remarkable improvements across all recovery centers. Average weight gain reached 4.2 kilograms per woman. Anemia cases decreased by 62%. Infection rates declined dramatically. Sleep quality improved from an average 4.1 hours nightly on arrival to 6.8 hours by week 6. These physical improvements created the necessary foundation for the more complex work ahead, the psychological transformation that would allow these women to reclaim their place in society. As bodies healed, minds began the more delicate process of reconstructing identity, trust, and hope. The methodical restoration of physical dignity through everyday necessities, clean water, nutritious food, appropriate clothing, and medical care, demonstrated a truth that transcended language barriers. Respect for human dignity could be communicated through actions more powerful than any words. The circle of wooden chairs in the villa's eastern sunroom held 13 women, each sitting slightly apart, maintaining invisible boundaries earned through weeks of careful trust-building. Captain Rebecca Friedman, a psychiatric nurse with specialized trauma training, sat among them rather than apart, a deliberate choice reflecting the program's philosophy. "Today we're discussing plans," she said simply. "Not the past, not what was done to you, but what you might wish for tomorrow." The silence that followed lasted exactly 47 seconds, documented in session notes dated July 12, 1944. This moment represented a pivotal threshold in psychological recovery. 8 weeks after their liberation, women who had expected torture were instead being asked about their desires for the future, a concept so foreign that many struggled to comprehend the question. Maria was the first to speak, her voice barely audible. "I would like to write a letter to my mother." This simple wish, recorded in Captain Friedman's session notes, marked the first forward-looking statement Maria had made since her arrival. The psychological transformation occurred through carefully structured phases. Military records detail this progression. Phase 1, weeks 1 to 3, focused on establishing safety and basic trust. Phase 2, weeks 4 to 6, addressed immediate trauma symptoms, including nightmares and hypervigilance. Phase 3, weeks 7 to 10, introduced concepts of future planning and identity reconstruction. This methodical approach, developed specifically for recovered comfort women, would later influence post-war trauma treatment protocols worldwide. Statistics documented the progression. Weekly psychological assessments tracked key indicators. Self-reported safety scores increased from an average 2.110 on arrival to 7.810 by week 8. Nightmare frequency decreased from 5.2 weekly episodes to 1.7. Most significantly, future orientation measures, the ability to conceptualize personal existence beyond immediate circumstances, rose from near zero to measurable levels in 82% of women by week 10. What proved most effective wasn't formal therapy, but practical skill development. The introduction of vocational training in week 7 created tangible evidence that another life remained possible. Typing classes, nursing assistant training, textile work, and administrative skills became concrete pathways toward independent futures. Records show 89% of women participated in at least one vocational program, with typing being the most requested skill at 43% enrollment. Sophia Gallo's case illustrated this transformation. Her initial psychological assessment noted, "Patient refuses eye contact, expects punishment for any perceived infraction, cannot articulate any future beyond the current day." By week 9, her file reported, "Patient has completed basic typing course, 35 words per minute, requested advanced training, and expressed interest in potential clerical positions with Allied civilian administration." Education about democratic principles occurred not through lectures, but everyday experiences. Women witnessed female officers giving orders to male subordinates. They observed respectful disagreements among staff resolved through discussion rather than force. They participated in decision-making about meal options and activity schedules. These living demonstrations of alternative power structures proved more persuasive than any formal instruction. Letters home became powerful therapeutic tools. Initially, many women were reluctant to contact families, fearing rejection or shame. The breakthrough came when Maria received a response from her mother 6 days after sending her first tentative letter. "She does not hate me," Maria told her therapy group, the letter clutched in her hands. "She has prayed for me every day." Within a week, writing materials became the most requested items in all recovery centers. Journal entries documented internal shifts invisible to external observation. Maria's diary, preserved in archival records, shows this evolution. June 4th, "I still feel dead inside despite their kindness." June 28th, "Today I laughed at something without thinking first if it was allowed." July 15th, "I realized this morning I no longer check if the door is locked from the outside." By August 1944, as Allied forces continued their northward advance through Italy, the recovery program faced its greatest challenge: preparing women for reintegration into communities where they might face judgment rather than understanding. Captain Friedman's reports acknowledge this reality. "We have succeeded in restoring basic psychological functioning. The greater challenge lies ahead, helping these women navigate societies that may not have undergone the same transformation they have experienced." This recognition led to the program's final phase: preparation for return. Women who had expected torture upon capture now faced a different fear: rejoining communities where their experiences remained unspoken and misunderstood. Yet something fundamental had shifted. Their daily experience of dignity had rebuilt not just bodies, but the capacity to imagine futures worth pursuing. The women who gathered in wooden circles no longer waited for punishment. They had begun, hesitantly but definitely, to plan for tomorrow. The bus rattled along the newly repaired road outside Naples in September 1944, carrying Maria and 17 other women back to their home region. Through the windows, they observed an Italy transformed by war. Buildings reduced to rubble, fields scarred by tank treads, makeshift markets where civilians traded desperately for necessities. For these women returning after months in recovery centers, the contrast between the ordered environment they had left and the chaotic reality of post-fascist Italy created a disorienting reversal. They had been rehabilitated into a society that itself needed rehabilitation. Maria clutched a small cardboard suitcase containing her new possessions: 3 dresses, undergarments, a pair of sturdy shoes, toiletries, and most precious of all, her vocational certificate in basic administrative skills. Also tucked inside was a sealed letter of recommendation from Captain Reynolds to potential employers, identifying her as a displaced civilian worker, with no mention of her forced service history. This deliberate omission reflected the program's philosophy that women's futures shouldn't be defined by coerced actions. The reintegration statistics revealed complex outcomes. Among the first 1,200 women returned to civilian communities, the Allied follow-up program documented 64% successfully reunited with immediate family, 22% relocated to different communities where their histories remained unknown, 8% found employment with Allied civilian administration, 6% reported insufficient support and requested additional assistance. These numbers, dry on military reports, represented individual human dramas playing out in villages and cities across liberated Italy. Community responses varied dramatically by region and family circumstance. In traditional southern villages, returning women often faced implicit suspicion, despite the careful narrative of displaced workers created by Allied authorities. Maria's homecoming illustrated this complexity. Her mother embraced her with tears, while her father maintained a painful distance. Neighbors visited with curious eyes but careful words. The parish priest spoke privately with her about forgiveness, though she had never confessed her experiences. These subtle interactions, multiplied across hundreds of communities, comprised the unwritten epilogue to the rehabilitation program. Lieutenant Gloria Martinez, assigned to reintegration monitoring in the Naples region, documented these nuances in her October 1944 report. The program's success cannot be measured solely by physical or psychological metrics. The final challenge lies in social reacceptance, where our influence is limited. Women who have rebuilt their sense of personal dignity now face communities that may not recognize their transformation or value their new skills. To address these challenges, Allied Civil Affairs units implemented supplementary support systems. Regional counseling centers provided ongoing psychological services. Employment liaison officers connected women with appropriate work opportunities, particularly with Allied civilian administration, where their experiences would remain confidential. Financial support programs offered 6-month stipends to those struggling to secure immediate employment. A confidential communication system allowed women to contact program staff if emergency intervention became necessary. Maria's experience demonstrated both challenges and resilience. Her diary entries from October 1944 recorded, "My typing skills secured a position with the new local government office. The Americans arranged it. The pay is 1,200 lire monthly, more than my father earns. This creates new tensions at home, yet provides independence I never imagined possible." 3 weeks later. Today, a man in the village made suggestive comments about women who lived with soldiers. My hands trembled, but I continued walking. Captain Friedman taught us that others' ignorance need not become our shame. By December 1944, follow-up assessments showed encouraging patterns. Employment retention reached 76% among program graduates. Housing stability measured 82%. Most significantly, psychological assessment scores remained relatively stable after community return, suggesting the resilience developed during rehabilitation sustained women through reintegration challenges. Some women transformed their experiences into advocacy. Sophia Gallo, after securing a position as an administrative assistant with Allied civil administration in Rome, began organizing evening support meetings for returned women. These unofficial gatherings, documented in Lieutenant Martinez's reports, evolved into mutual aid networks that outlasted the formal Allied programs. By spring 1945, 12 such groups operated across central and southern Italy, creating sustainable support independent of military structures. The women who had expected torture upon capture now demonstrated unexpected strength navigating post-war society. Their journey from military brothels through rehabilitation to community reintegration revealed an unplanned outcome of the Allied approach. By treating victims with dignity rather than judgment, the program had cultivated not just recovery, but resilience. Women who had been systematically dehumanized emerged not as passive recipients of aid, but as active participants in Italy's democratic reconstruction, a transformation that mirrored the nation's own difficult evolution from fascism to freedom. Rome, June 1974. The elderly woman adjusted her glasses as she addressed the small gathering at the 30th anniversary conference on post-war reconstruction. "I was 22 when Allied forces found me," Maria Esposito Conti began, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "What I expected was punishment. What I received was restoration of my humanity." The audience, historians, psychologists, and aging veterans of the rehabilitation program, listened as one of the few comfort women willing to speak publicly shared her testimony. This gathering represented the culmination of 3 decades of quiet impact. The Allied program for rehabilitating Italian comfort women never appeared in official military histories or victory narratives. Yet its influence extended far beyond the 6,124 women directly served between 1944 and 1945. The program's innovative approach to trauma recovery established methodologies later adopted worldwide. The psychological protocols developed in villas like Rosetta influenced post-war treatment of concentration camp survivors, displaced persons, and eventually civilian victims of later conflicts. The statistics tell one dimension of this legacy. Follow-up studies conducted in 1955 found that among program participants who could be located, 72% maintained stable employment, 68% had married, 64% reported satisfactory integration into their communities. More remarkably, when compared with control groups of women with similar trauma who received no specialized rehabilitation, program participants showed significantly lower rates of alcoholism, 23% versus 47%, chronic depression, 31% versus 58%, and suicide, 4% versus 19%. These numbers, published in obscure medical journals, quietly validated the program's approach. The program's influence on Italian society manifested in unexpected ways. Several rehabilitation staff remained in Italy after the war, establishing treatment centers using methods developed for comfort women. Dr. Elizabeth Bennett opened a women's clinic in Rome that operated from 1946 to 1972, serving over 40,000 patients while training a generation of Italian medical professionals in trauma-sensitive care. Captain Rebecca Friedman's psychological protocols were incorporated into Italy's national healthcare system by 1960, representing an unplanned export of therapeutic approaches developed through military necessity. Perhaps most significantly, 17 former comfort women eventually entered helping professions themselves. Maria Esposito Conti became an administrator at the Naples Women's Health Center. Sophia Gallo completed nursing training and worked in maternal health until retirement. These women brought intimate understanding of trauma and recovery to their professional roles, becoming quiet revolutionaries in Italy's evolving healthcare system. The program's philosophical legacy extended beyond clinical techniques. Its fundamental premise that dignity rather than punishment could facilitate profound transformation influenced Italy's post-war approach to political reconciliation. Several historians have noted connections between rehabilitation principles and Italy's relatively peaceful transition from fascism to democracy. Professor Antonio Lombardi of the University of Rome argued in his 1968 analysis, "The American rehabilitation model demonstrated that acknowledging human dignity, even among those who served enemy forces, created pathways toward democratic reintegration. This lesson influenced Italy's approach to political reconciliation. Yet the greatest impact remained deeply personal. In interviews conducted for the 30th anniversary historical project, former comfort women consistently identified the same transformative element, being treated as humans worthy of dignity after systematic dehumanization. One participant, choosing to remain anonymous, explained, "They could have treated us as spoils of war, as the Nazis warned they would. Instead, they treated us as women who deserved futures. This simple recognition changed everything." The rehabilitation program's surprising success stemmed from its practicality. Rather than abstract ideological re-education, it offered concrete daily demonstrations of alternative values through ordinary interactions. Women who had experienced systematic cruelty encountered systematic kindness. Those who had been treated as objects for exploitation were treated as subjects with agency. This lived experience of different possibilities proved more persuasive than any propaganda. In her concluding remarks at the anniversary gathering, Maria Esposito Conti offered the simplest summary of the program's meaning. "I expected torture from my liberators because that's what I had been taught liberation meant, replacing one form of domination with another. Instead, I discovered freedom means the absence of domination altogether. This lesson couldn't be taught with words, only demonstrated through actions. The Americans showed us dignity by treating us with dignity. They defeated not just an enemy army, but an entire philosophy of human disposability." The Italian women who expected torture upon capture instead encountered a revolutionary idea implemented through ordinary kindnesses, that human value remains inviolable regardless of circumstance. Their transformation from terrified captives to independent citizens represented victory not through force, but through the deliberate, systematic restoration of dignity that enemies had tried to destroy. In the end, the simple decision to treat broken women with respect accomplished what no weapon could achieve: the complete reconstruction of a worldview built on fear into one capable of sustaining hope.